Um, hello, it's time for our speaker. And today's speaker is, let's see, our Circle City native, John Allen, is a founding and active member of the Speculative Fiction Guild and a faculty member of the Indiana Writers Center. John has been writing stories ever since he could pick up a pencil, and apparently that's what led him to study creative writing at IUPUI. His first novel, The God Killers, was published in 2013, and he followed that with a spin-off series titled Codename Night Ranger, and he also penned the novelization of screenwriter, producer, and director Demetrius Witherspoon's short film Submerge, Echo 51. John's latest book is his short story collection, which he titled The Best Is Yet to Come. You may not know it, but John has been a Speed City Sister Mister since 2023. Is that right, John? Mm-hmm. Okay. And we were lucky when he agreed to serve as our media chair this year. And now we're even luckier because he agreed to be our guest speaker today to cover the foundations of fiction. So now I'm going to stop talking and turn things over to our good friend, former PI, and awesome writer, John Allen.
Thank you, everyone. Honored to be here. Hopefully we'll have a little fun, probably at my expense. What today's workshop is Foundations in Fiction. All of you who are published authors probably know everything I'm going to talk about, but I thought it would be great to be able to interact as a group, sharing ideas about the topics, the foundations of fiction and what it takes to create fiction, the various basic steps necessary. So, what I'm going to do is go through what I have here and talk about it. And then I actually want to open it up to questions from anyone as they may have about the various subjects. So first thing is theme and plot. Everyone knows basic, there's a difference between theme and plot. Theme, what your story's about; plot, what happens in your story. A lot of people get them confused, and pardon me, and they don't understand. It's like a business plan. You have your statement, you know, what your company is about and how you plan to implement what you're going to do. And it's very much the same thing with theme and plot as it pertains to the writer. So I like to, when I teach this workshop for IWC and IPL, I usually say, you know, your plot is very similar to the blurb on the back of a book. You know, tells you what the story is about, gives you a little overview of it. And your theme is, you know, or your plot is basically what your story, what happens in your story, but your theme is what your story is about. And so those are the broad strokes. So like your mission statement in a business, you know, what your mission is. So when people, beginners especially, are putting together something for writing a story, and we'll use short stories as opposed to novels as a longer form of fiction, it's good to have a list of elements that your story is about, which is your theme. And then as you build upon that, you're able to create your plot as to what happens in your story, how it moves from point A to point B in broad strokes, but it's filling in some of the blanks that your theme doesn't share with your reader. So getting those basic ideas together at the very beginning is a great way to um, help you develop the story as you're writing it. Now, personally, I am not a plotter. I'm a planster. And that's like someone who has very minimal plotting and just pretty much writes from the seat of their pants. And that's me. I may have some notes about my idea for the story, but a lot of it, most of it is kept up in my head. And I just simply sit in front of my laptop and I just go. That's not for everybody. Some people have to have detailed outlines. I hate outlines personally. I don't disparage anyone who uses outlines. If it works for you, great. Doesn't work for me, has never worked for me. Are my high school and college instructors were always, hey, you need to outline. Well, I didn't believe them. I didn't like that. And I never did it except for when I had to turn the outline in and I wrote this BS outline so that they would, leave me alone. But pretty much I did what I wanted to do. I was a rebel. Yes. I said and did a lot of things in high school that probably should have gotten me in the dean's office, but people were amused by it. And sometimes some of the outrageous things I said and did and wrote, my my instructors were so amused by it that they just kind of just like let me, it's like they shook their finger at me and then laughed at the same time. So, I got away with some things. But does anyone have any ideas or thoughts or feelings about theme and plot that they want to share? Crickets. Okay. So moving on. Moving on, exposition. So at the beginning of the story, character setting and main conflict are typically introduced. When I am writing, usually within the first 2 pages, I've introduced the protagonist. I've given you an overview of what is the conflict, what is the challenge for that protagonist. I've given you the setting and kind of uh, an overview into the characters, what they do, as a profession, and their thoughts, because it's important to get that stuff out of the way as an introduction so that you can build upon it as you write the story and you begin to world build and you begin to character develop as the story progresses. So I think that that's important for folks to understand. Again, I'm sure all of you know all about this, but it would be nice if you guys had interjections, shared your thoughts on how you do things, because that's important. Everyone does things differently. Um, you've heard the saying, you gotta know the rules before you break the rules. Well, that was the foundational things that, we're taught in high school and college about writing, and then we go out here and break the rules and do stuff. And some of us are fortunate enough to make millions of dollars doing it, and the rest of us are selling a few books here and there.
Yeah.
So, um, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Um, that's the whoop, whoop, whoop. So, yes.
Suspense stories, they tell you to do that in the first few pages, but I generally don't do it in the first few pages. My story kind of slides into that.
Well, I found personally that I tend to lose engagement if I'm not giving them the information, at least in the first chapter or the first scene, first couple of scenes at least, if it's a short story. Yeah, yeah.
Not.
Well, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the first paragraph now. That's not what I said, but you want to have it earlier on. I mean, if you're writing a story and people are reading and they don't even know the primary character's name or anything about them, then they'll be asking themselves questions. Why am I reading this? Why should I care? This character, who are they?
Right.
And if a reader has too many questions that you don't answer early on, they will probably not finish.
Right.
So-
I think the ones they, slam you with a lot of information right away, but then I'm afraid I'll lose the impetus,
Yeah, and that goes back into the character development, that's the exposition is getting all that stuff out there in the beginning, and then your character development goes along with who this character is, their little habits, the things that make them tick. I also tell folks a lot, not so much a lot of narration or info dumps when you are developing characters. You want to put them in that scene, and if you can reveal things about that character through their actions or through dialogue with another character, it's better to do that. And also, when you are writing dialogue, it's a great thing to use sensory input and also actions between the dialogue, so that just like if you're sitting and having tea with someone, somebody's going to sip the tea. And that's a good way to kind of break the monotony of the ping pong or pong, as we used to play on the Atari, boop, 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 boop. It kind of gives you a visualization of what's happening, and it also can give you an insight on what that character's feeling. So that when you're saying, they said something and then they took a sip of tea and, glared at so-and-so who was with them, it kind of gives you a reaction to what that other character had said. So it kind of gives you that back and forth, but it gives you a little bit more pieces, and it gives you an idea of that character's personality, because maybe they're a humorless person and they're looking at them like my grandson looks at you. That's one of them. His brother's like, and he's like, so, that's that's a way in which to deal with that. As far as rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, you're going to do that. You're going to have that exposition. You're going to introduce the characters, the setting, and everything, and then maybe put that conflict in there, what they're going to be dealing with. But you got to ramp it up. I put my characters personally through hell. I don't like for them to have happiness until at least the very end or somewhere right after the climax, because it's like the character of this is a fantastical thing, but Superman. In the very beginning, he was invulnerable. Nothing. I mean, who wants somebody that's just always going to win, or that they're going to win and it's so easy? No, it doesn't need to be easy. I put my characters through hell because I go through hell in life. We have things happen to us. It gives you a sense of reality if your characters are having issues that they're having to get through, and not just the main issue or the main conflict, little conflicts. Like if it's a working class person and something happened and they're late with their light bill and, they're frustrated about this. It gives you a sense of this person being real and you being able to better relate to them. If they go through life and they don't have any downs and it's all ups, that's boring. So that rising action, them going through these maybe smaller conflicts as they're reaching to get to that major conflict, and then your climax when the sugar honey iced tea hits the fan and you are like, oh, he or she is in it now. There's no turning back. It's the point of no return, and they have to face this. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? And then it's like that euphoric moment after the conflict and descending action or falling action, and then of course the resolution that resolves everything, wraps up the story. If you are writing a novel and it's going to be a series, I personally recommend that you don't wrap up the ending too tightly, that you give a little leeway for what's coming next. If it's a one and done, then they can go off into the sunset, not unscathed, by the way. They have to have had change in their life, some kind of way that's lasting and permanent. You don't go through life and the trials and tribulations of life without being scathed. It just doesn't happen, and it's not realistic. So you want them to have battle scars, but if you're writing a series, then you want to at least have some of those scars addressed as you move into the next book, because a lot of times you're going to have to recap some things that happened in the prior book to give that reader an idea of who these characters are, what's going on with them or whatnot. Because if one of the things about writing a series too is that not everyone's going to start with the first book. If you have 10 books out, they may start with book number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, because the story looked more interesting and they got it from BookBub for 99 cents or whatever, something like that may happen. And you'll want to catch that reader up with who the characters are, what got them to this point, so forth and so on. So you have to be mindful of that, but you don't want to drag it on to the point where they're like, okay, I've got to read this 3 pages to get me caught up on who this character is. Some of the things that will inform your reader about their character in book 3 need to come out in the things that they say and do to make it flow easier. Mm-hmm.
So is that necessary in the short story too, that needs to be a change at the end?
Yeah, all stories, in my opinion, all stories, there needs to be something that character has, after they've gone through that conflict, that has changed. That's called character growth. If they don't have any character growth, if they're the same as when the story first started, then what's the point? What's the point in them actually having gone through anything? If you have a love and let's say you've been married for 20 years, you've gone through some changes. You are not the same person that when y'all said I do and you sitting up there smiling in each other's faces in front of all your friends and family or whatnot. You're young and awestruck and love struck and all that. Reality sits in, life sits in. It's going to take you through some changes. You're going to want to just strangle that person, and they're going to want to strangle you, and all of that, and you're going to get so mad sometimes that you just storm out, and they storm out, and and then you realize, hey, I love this person, and that love is going to get you to stop, woosah, and reassess the problem and then come together, hopefully, to try and work it out so that both parties' issues are addressed. And there's a song from long ago by Peaches and Herb called Reunited. And I always loved that song, even as a little kid, because I was like, they got into an argument. They had some stuff going on, but then they came back and it made them feel so good because they were in each other's arms and they realized that their love was stronger than whatever it was their conflict was. And I thought, oh, even as a kid, this is 1979, I was thinking, wow, that's the kind of love I want. And it's idealistic, but once you go through it, of course, yes, some of those elements of that song are really great. And then at the same time, you're thinking, it didn't quite happen like that. There's more to it, but generally speaking, yes, your characters have to have some type of change for character growth. Otherwise, what's the point, right? What's the point in even telling the story? Three more things or four more things, and then I'll want to hear from you guys. Setting. Setting is very important because not only is setting the physical plane or place where the story takes place, it's also the atmosphere of that the characters are in within this area where the story takes place. And setting can also be an actual character in the story, depending upon how you write the story. If it's, I'll give you an example. Yes, it's a fantastical one, but in the movie Batman in 1989, Gotham City was a character in that movie. It had this omnipresent, just gloom. Everything about that city touched everything that everybody did, how they acted, what they said, how they felt, and it was always ever present. You couldn't escape it. And it had a life of its own that was just basically sucking the life out of people, and crime was rampant, and all of these types of things. So it was actually a character within that movie. That's not, you don't have to make it a character within, but it does need to have its own atmosphere that basically influences how your characters act and react and what happens during the course of the story. Not a lot of need for air condition in the Antarctic, but air condition in the South, you might die if you don't have it. You might, I mean, it's going to get hot. That atmosphere, that setting is going to inform what your characters do. Unless, of course, you're a teenager or 20-year-old something and it's 80 degrees out and you have on UGG boots and a knit cap. I don't understand that, but that's a fashion thing that they do. And, I don't wear winter clothes when it's hot. I would just lay out and die because I don't like that, but that's a thing. So anyway, structure. So with structure, why is there a story to tell? How is it going to get your reader from point A to point B to point C? What type of framework are you going to use to tell your story? That's a very important thing to work out. Of course, with me as a planster, I don't spend a lot of time with that. It kind of flows. A lot of people, when they outline, they've got it all figured out. Well, chapter 3 is going to do this and it's going to do that. And then I've got to meet all these beats here. If I had to do that, nothing would get written because it's just not in my nature to do. I like things to flow, and it flows out of me as I'm writing it. It comes to me, and I'm I'm inspired in the moment. That doesn't mean I don't write on demand. Let's clear that up, because if I only wrote when I was pre-inspired, I'd never get anything done. As a writer, the late great Jim Powell told me, "You got to write on demand, damn it." And yes, Jim Powell. Yes, he was a strong motivator, and it's why one of the reasons why I'm here today. But another aspect of this is character development. When you're and I spoke about that earlier, when you're developing the characters, you're wanting to have those characters go through their trials and tribulations, and you want them to prepare to engage in that main conflict. But you're going to have to you're going to be a witness or a party to how they handle those things. And how they handle those things are going to speak to their character, just like in real life, how you handle the situation. So I'll give you a scenario. You're at a restaurant. The waiter or waitress is very rude. Your food is not right. Not only is it not right, but it's cold and it's supposed to be hot. And there's a number of ways you could complain about it. You could become very belligerent and negative and angry and cause a scene. You could do that, but is that the best way to handle it? But it would also inform people about how you handle conflicts. If you are more understanding, in the sense that you're not going to wig out, you're not going to be belligerent, but you are going to stand up for yourself as a consumer. And you're going to ask to speak to the manager. You're going to tell them exactly what happened. And, you'll see what kind of resolution they give you. If it's not satisfactory, then you have the choice to never eat at that restaurant again. And you have the choice to tell all your friends and anyone who will listen that, about your experience. So those are the types of things when you're going to have character development, you're going to inform your reader about how your characters interact, how they react, and who they are and how they handle the situations that, are placed in their path. And then one of my favorite things to do is world building. World building is especially important when you're writing speculative fiction, but it is important when you are writing any type of fiction, because you're going to establish the world in which your story takes place. And if you've never been to Alabama and you've lived all your life in Indiana, it's like a different world. I went down there in my mid-20s, and it's a whole different way of life that I had never experienced before. And so when you are developing that world within your story, you have to give a visual and more in-depth idea to your reader as to not only the geographical location of where the story takes place, but how the people in this environment interact and how they react, and how your character is going to interact, and react with those around them. And then things that are happening within that setting are going to help you to develop this world. And if it's speculative fiction, it could be that the story takes place on, another planet or in another dimension. But if it's more like mystery writing or literary fiction, it's going to take place in a world that's much like what we live in reality. But if it's somewhere that is different from what you usually experience, then you're going to have to take that into consideration as well, because it's a different kind of heat in Texas than it is here. And I was down there in the summer, um, uh, 34 years ago at the basic training, um, and it was an entirely different thing. The animals down there are different. They had hares, these big giant rabbits. I'm like, and armadillos. I mean, you don't see that here in Indiana. So, it's a whole new world. And then when I visited Las Vegas, and then you're looking out of the window of the hotel and you see the mesas and all that desert, that scared me. I'm like, I'm not going out there, because if I get, I'll die. I'm not used to that kind of thing. But, that's the kind of world that you have to immerse your reader in, and give those little finite details, and let them feel as though they are in this world and that they are experiencing this world along with your characters. So please talk. Please say something. Please tell me how you do things, or what your thoughts are on the topics that I discussed so far.
Well, I'll say something. I, I had a story that had a scene in North Dakota. I'd never been to North Dakota. I looked at it online and pictures like that, and I ended up taking the little town that I do live in, which is Monrovia, Indiana, and setting the cross-country track in North Dakota, because I wanted to have my characters talking while they walked around the track.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I did actually go to North Dakota, and there's no way that scene would work the way I had said it. So I had to redo that whole scene, but it was like, I had to be there to see it to get that.
Mm-hmm. My first novel takes place in Chicago and New Orleans. I've been to Chicago several times, so that was not a problem. It was like a second home to me 30 years ago. I was in Chicago all of the time. I can tell you, I can even drive around that city after all these years and not really get lost, and go out to Elk Grove and Schaumburg. I'm love Chicago, right? Know my way around. I've never set one toe in New Orleans. So what I did was I went to Google Maps, and I did the visual as they had the little cars with the cameras on the top, and they drive all the way around. I looked at everything. I made all these different little notes. That was the time when I was being the planter, and that was the planning part of that. When I was telling you earlier that I was making all these little notes about what I saw in through the Google Maps, right? So then I did other research. Other research was I read books about New Orleans, right? Then I put a call out and said, anyone who's ever been to New Orleans or lives in New Orleans, let's talk. And I found some people who lived there. And so between the notes that I took from Google Maps and what I had read and what these people who live down there told me, I have a pretty good idea about it. And so when I wrote that novel and people read it, they were like, oh, how long did you live in New Orleans? I was like, I've never been to New Orleans. It's on my bucket list, right? But I've never been. But you have to do that research for that authenticity. And if you can visit somewhere before write in that setting, then by all means do so. But if you can't, extensive research is required. And the people who live down there are the best references, because, they're there now. Historically speaking, you can get a lot of things from books and stuff like that. But if someone's down there right now, they can tell you. And then I watched a lot of footage from Katrina, the aftermath of Katrina. That was one of the things, because the main character in my novel, she lost her grandmother in Katrina. And so that aftermath of all that informed a lot of what I was writing and how I was setting the scene and how I was talking about what had happened. And then one of the scenes in New Orleans is in the cemetery, it's the St. Louis Cemetery. And I made a distinction about how the graves are in New Orleans, how they're above ground, like they're not like here, and then they've got all these mausoleums and all this architecture and how that takes, how that is going to be visualized, right? So I wanted to make sure that I made those distinctions to be as authentic as possible. I also asked them about the smells in New Orleans.
Yeah.
I could not get that by doing the Google Maps. I could see all the people in the restaurants and they're having the fun. Well, what did it smell like? What were the sounds like? Because I like to put a lot of sensory information in my writing because that gives you something to go on to reach your reader as well, because most of us know what brewing coffee smells like.
Right.
But do we really know what jambalaya smells like? Not everybody does. Not everybody's had jambalaya. Some people don't know about shrimp and grits, and they're like, I've never had that before, or etouffee. Might not know what that tastes like, and so you have to make sure that you are giving these elements that are going to stimulate your reader's senses, so that it's not just reading words on a page. Anybody else? I know y'all got stuff to talk about. I mean, you know.
We're gonna talk about you after you leave, that's what.
Oh, well, y'all do that anyway, so, you know.
So this is mostly for short stories you're talking about, right?
That's what I'm focusing on as opposed to longer forms of.
Right, how long, I don't know, just a random sort of thought, how long does it take for you to write a short story?
For me, it kind of will depend upon one, the deadline. But generally speaking, if I focus and I'm wanting to put an 8-hour workday in or whatnot, I can write a 6,000 to 10,000 word short story in a day. I've done it before. But I don't like to do it like that. I was so excited when I wrote that short story in a day. I mean, I started in the morning and the sun had set and I was like so excited or whatnot, but it was actually my first published short story too, which was, an experience in and of itself. But generally speaking, I try to write about 1,000 words a day. That's my goal. Sometimes rarely do I go over that. Most of the times it's between 500 and 1,000 words a day. Monday through Friday, usually, sometimes on Saturday if I'm inspired, never on Sunday. I give my brain a rest and football's on. So anyway, but yeah, that's how long it usually takes me. So with the short story that I'm writing for our anthology, upcoming anthology or whatnot, I'm already 1,000 words in. I just started that this week, but next week I plan to hit it a little bit harder, probably have it halfway or 2/3 of the way written as far as the word count that I'm aiming for. Probably have it wrapped up by week after next for that first draft. So I'll be ready for the critique group.
So then tell me about rewriting. I mean, once you finish your first draft, how close are you to that at that point, to it actually being your final draft?
So that's a good question. So with this, I'll give this short story for the anthology as an example. Week after next, probably early in that week, I'll have the first draft. Then what I do is I read it. And I'm going to read it out loud. So I tell my wife in advance, I'm not crazy. There's no one else in the house. It's just me working. And I go into my office and I read it out loud, and especially the dialogue, because I want to hear how it sounds, audibly. And that's going to help me to work out any of the kinks that I need to work out before I put it in front of the critique group. Because I try to go through after I've written that first initial draft and critique it as much myself and edit it as much myself before I put it in front of anybody else. And usually that makes for a cleaner draft so that they're not, well, what were you thinking? And it makes it easier in the editing process from once it's critiqued um, by others and put in front of others for me to be able to say, okay, well, you know, at least I'm not quite as embarrassed. And
Something nice.
and then it also it helps me uh, because when I get that feedback, it's um a lot of it's not so, oh, well, you really messed this up. It's more like, well, this is what I got from this. This is what I saw. This is what I feel. This is what I think. And then I can take those things into perspective and work them in as I see fit. A lot of times with editors that I've had in the past, they're always saying, well, you really give pretty clean drafts when they get to me. So I appreciate that. And then they give me their feedback and then I put that into perspective, usually in a Word document, making sure that they see the changes and asking when they reread it, do these changes meet the items or what you had mentioned needed work? And then they give me their feedback. It's usually a 3 draft process. So it's that first initial draft, then I go through and edit. Then that second draft goes to the editors. Then they give me their feedback, and then I present that third draft back to them after I've addressed it. I like to do it in threes. Sometimes it extends to 5, but not very often. It just kind of depends upon, again, what form of fiction. A novel is going to probably go through 5 drafts. Short stories usually 3 and out. So from the initial first draft. What's going on out there? Are you people still there? You got questions? Come on, you got things to say. How do you do things? I mean, how do you character develop?
Okay, John, I've got a question. Okay, do you ever have a problem letting go? I mean, you're never satisfied with the story and you're always changing it. That's one of my problems.
I have had that happen, but it doesn't happen to me very often in the sense that, so because I'm a pantser, like I'll give you an example. The 1,000 words that I've written thus far in this anthology short story that I'm writing, as I've written it, I've shuffled that thing so many times. Just thank God for computers, because if this were on a typewriter, I would never. I took paragraphs and moved them around in sequence so that it flowed better. But what I wrote, for the most part, I only had to adjust a little bit. But that's just to get it down. I'm perfectly happy with it being rough, that first draft. Then on that initial editing, self-editing that I do, is when I catch those little things. And then once I've done that, I don't have too much of a problem to just say, go. It's like those tortoises, when they're in the sand, and then, when it comes time for them to come out of the sand and go into the ocean to see tortoises, and they just go, and they get into the ocean, and then, they got to survive because all kinds of stuff waiting on them. And that's what the editors and the critique people are. They're the crabs and all the other stuff that are coming to get them. But the story, but you know, the story is the turtle, and it just goes into the ocean. I have had some issues killing darlings. Some stuff I felt like was just so good, but ultimately I gave in and said, you know what? The editor's right, flows better without it. So I have this little file of all my darlings that I've had to slay over the time that since I've been writing. And I keep them there because guess what? I'm determined I'm gonna use them somewhere. So, you know, I think that um, you have to be able to say, you know what, this is like my baby, but babies grow up and it's time for them. My son, I'll give you this analogy. My son, he turns 20 in December. And, you know, I remember carrying him in a little carrier or whatnot, and he was just as a little baby. And, you know, now he's larger than I am. And I had to let him go. I had to let him have those experiences. I had to let him get those scrapes and bruises, and that's what those critiques are. And, you know, I had to let him start to fend for himself, and I guide him, you know, I give him as much wisdom as I have to impart, and, you know, I try and protect him as best as I can, but I know that I can't protect him from everything. So sometimes it's hard to do, but just like with children or just like with anything, sometimes you have to, if you are like me, a believer, you have to let go and let God. That's a thing for me personally. I have to just say, you know what, it's in other hands now. I've done what I can do at this point. And then just like with him, there's times he had to come back to me and I had to help him reassess the situation and push him back out there again, you know, fly. And that's how I handle it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. So we are, um, Diana, we started a little late. I don't know if you are wanting or anyone's wanting me to finish up in the next 15 minutes, because that's about how late we started.
I don't care. I don't know how. Our donations were at 1:30.
1:30.
Get through till for a little bit longer.
Okay, so I only have just a few more things. Shouldn't take long at all. So dialogue, emotion, and voice. Dialogue for me is something that's very important when you're writing your story, because not only does it give you a sense of the characters' voices, but it also will inform the reader about things that you don't want to just info dump in your narration. And it also informs the little quirks that your character may have, how they do things, how they react to things, you know, little things about them. I'll give you an example of a character. I know he's been in prose, but it was based off of the TV show Monk. So he's OCD, so he's got the obsessive compulsive disorder or whatnot. They call it something different now, but back when the show was on, that's what it was called. And he has to have things a certain way or it will just mess with him. I have that, but not to that extent. I like to have things balanced. If I have stuff in my office, there has to be some kind of balancing there. If I have something that's just sticking out, it's going to be like, I don't like this. I'm not going to get to the point where I'm getting frantic about it, but it will niggle away at me in the back of my mind. And I'm like, I've got to change this. I've got to change. This is just, it's not right. That's one of the reasons why I'm so ordered about things. And people tell me, you know, how do you keep a clean office? I can't deal with clutter. I have papers all over the place. They got to go on file 13. I just can't do it. But, when it comes to dialogue, it's very important that you are expressing things in a way that is going to engage your reader. And a lot of times, like I had mentioned before, sensory input, sensory perceptions, things of that nature are going to be key. And it needs to be crisp, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be authentic. That's why I especially like to read dialogue out loud after I've written anything, because sometimes in your head it sounds different when you're hearing it. You're hearing it aloud, and you're gonna be like, "Well, that doesn't quite track." But you also have to deal with each individual character's voice. Not everyone speaks the same, and not always do they speak the same in certain environments. As you're hearing me speak to you now, it is my normal speaking. I mean, in the sense that it is a part of me, and this is how I speak most of the time. I'd say about 85 to 90% of the time. Get me back in my old neighborhood.
Yeah.
Might be a little bit different. It's going to be more relaxed. I'm going to use a lot more slang, and it's going to feel different because of who I'm addressing. I would never go on a job interview. Yo, my man, what's up? Hey, man, I ain't seen you in a while. Okay, that's not going to happen there. But if I'm there at, when I go to my class reunion, hey, what's up, man? Yeah, that, because that's a part of me too. That's how, So when you are dealing with the voice of your characters, you have to make sure that it's authentic to who they are and the circumstances and situations in which they are in. That's going to inform the syntax of your voice of your characters. And, how are you going to differentiate a character when you have dialogue? Well, some people don't use the word ain't regardless. Some people don't use the word y'all regardless. I do. So no matter how well-spoken I may seem or appear, like today, get me on Facebook. Y'all tripping. It's gonna that's how I mean that's part of me. That's what you're gonna get. And I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm not gonna make it, well, I have to put on airs. I don't like airs. What you see is what you get. If you lived in the 70s, that's saying, and that's just what it is. So you have to make sure that that comes through in your writing as well. Emotions. A lot of people have issues with emotions and conveying those emotions in prose. Well, guess what? What most of the people I talk to, I tell them that's why you should keep a journal. Write down the things that make you feel a certain way every day or at least 3 times a week. And guess what? You'll have some ideas on how to write emotions because we all feel emotions. None of us are Vulcans. Even Vulcans have emotions. If you are a Trekkie, you'll know that they just suppress them. Talk about Spock's mom and he's kicking your $double. I'm telling you, I know. I'm a Trekkie. I know. That is what I'm saying. So, emotions are important when you're writing, not just dialogue, but your introspection as well. When you are getting into the innermost thoughts of your characters, emotions should shine through. You should be able to tell if someone is angry, but you don't always have to tell that. You can show that. As he left, he slammed the door. Well, most people don't slam doors unless they're pissed off. So that being said, that shows that anger, right? They grimaced, they gritted their teeth, they snarled. These are things that are going to show that emotion. The word choice, how I speak to you calmly is, will you hand that remote to me, please? I'm angry. give me the damn remote. And I'm rude, but that's going to actually give you an idea about this character. So emotions play an important role in dialogue and in narration. And I'm going to end things there.
The trouble with your journals is when you get to be 80 years old and you have books and books and books and books of journals, and then you die, and then your family has all those journals. Oh. And
Yeah.
then what?
Yeah. And I keep a digital journal, so there's that. I did have some written journals. I did transpose those into digital, so there's that as well. But I'm finished with things. Unless anyone has any questions for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I gotta run,
Okay,
family emergency.
oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, John.